Hey everybody, this is Dust for Dustin on Gaming. Unfortunately, I won't be streaming tonight, but doing a small deck tech slash report from FNM last night. Gonna try to start getting some more videos up. So, as many of you who have been paying attention to the channel know, or are not new to the channel, deck I play in paper is usually Boros or Naya Burn. Obviously, I've had quite a bit of success with it. It's a deck that I play quite proficiently in Modern. Finally picked up a second Modern deck, and that was Blue-White Control. Now, there's several different versions of Blue-White Control. There's things with 4-mana sweepers. There is decks that try to win with various different things. But kind of the two de facto versions that seem to pop up the most are the Miracles version and like the one of like usually has like one of like Gideon, one of Jace, Architect of Thought, etc. So usually it's like the singleton version of Blue-Eye Control with like, one Supreme Verdict, one Wrath of God, one Day of Judgment, one Terminus to diversify your threats against humans. And the Miracles version, which certain players seem to think is the better version of the deck. So this particular main deck is almost card for card what Jeff Hoogland played from a viewers donated list. Even down to the Approach of the Second Sun as the win con. We'll get into that in a minute. I mean, beyond that, you've got your 4 Colonnade, your 4 Field of Ruin, which has kind of become the industry standard. A lot of these decks also run 1 Ghost Quarter to have Game Against Tron. In my opinion, in Modern, 5 colorless mans might be even too many. Another point of contention, or varies from list to list, is Temple of Enlightenment versus Irrigated Farmland. I don't currently own Temple of Enlightenment, so I was kind of running Irrigated Farmland as another way to trigger Terminus on my opponent's turn in addition to Opt and Thoughtscour. Beyond that, got your Flooded Strands, couple Glacial Fortresses, couple Hallowed Fountains, 5 islands and 2 plains to be able to go get with when your opponent's path through Snapcaster Mages or Field of Ruin or Ghost Quarter you. It's kind of important to have some basics, especially if you're fearing Blood Moon in the meta you're in. And I have at least one Mardu Pyromancer list usually I'm playing against, so it's pretty good to have access to basics. Beyond that, this deck's a lot of 4-ofs, 4 Opt, 4 Thoughtscour. Obviously, in generally speaking, these cards are worse than Serum Visions. I'm not even going to debate that. Their benefit is they do help you to trigger the Miracle mechanic on Terminus during your opponent's turn. Opt in Thoughtscour. Thoughtscour allows you to clear off like the top 2 cards after a Jace Brainstorm, see a fresh card. Opt obviously gives you 2 hits at finding your Terminus. 3 Search for Azcanta. Pretty big card advantage in card selection engine. A lot of matchups you need to find your cards very quickly. Sometimes you only have a turn or 2 to find your Terminus against things like Affinity or Humans or a lot of those various other decks. 3 Snapcaster Mages. This deck doesn't have a ton to Snapcast back. You have 4 Path, the Cantrips, and Logic Knots realistically, and as you get into the later game you can snap back Cryptic or Terminus. So Snapcaster Mage with the Cantrips and the Paths have a lot of utility, and we also have some cards on the sideboard that are pretty decent for them. 3 Jace. Jace is severely underperformed in Modern as a whole since its unbanning, but the one card that seems to pair very well with it is Terminus, because you can Jace, Brainstorm, put a Terminus back on top of your deck to set up a Miracle, just like you do with Modern or Legacy Miracles. Beyond that, 3 Cryptic Command. 4 Cryptic Command's almost too unreliable in the deck. A lot of times you need to buy time on like turn 4 against some of the aggressive decks if you haven't found your Terminus yet and you don't really want to try landing a Jace. So you use like Cryptic, tap the team, draw a card, continue to get some velocity there. 3 Logic Knots pairs quite nicely with Thoughtscour. Fills up your graveyard. Thoughtscour also serves purposes with Search for Azcanta. Finally you have Teferi, which is your other primary win con outside of Approach of the Second Sun, which we'll get to in a minute. Another card advantage engine to pair with Jace. If you hit Teferi's ultimate and then Jace Brainstorm, your opponent loses a lot of permanents really quickly. Terminus, the reason we're playing this build, 6-mana sweeper, obviously not that great, but if you're able to hit for its miracle cost, a 1-mana sweeper is pretty insane. Also keeps the cards from going to the graveyard, which is relevant against a lot of the graveyard decks floating around. And finally, our win con, the main deck, Approach of the Second Sun. So, I'm not 100% confident in my ability as a control player, and blue-white seems to have a lot of matchups where you need to get them dead, and blue-white suffers from, unlike Jeskai or some of the other lists, it doesn't run burn spells to kind of kill your opponent. This allows you to cast Approach of the Second Sun, gain some life, between your Jaces, your Teferis, your Thought Scours, your Search for Azcantas. You have a lot of ways to cycle through your deck pretty quickly. So I've actually had turns where, I've approached and then like 1.5 turn cycles later I'm casting a second approach for the win. Sideboard, I kind of took a very generic approach to sideboarding. We'll get into the matchups that I played here in a minute. A couple Stony Silences. Stony's usually a pretty good hedge against things like KCI, Affinity, those various decks, if you're going to think you're going to see any of those. Also Lantern Control, if anybody at your shop's running that. One of Oust, this is a 5th 1-mana removal spell. It buys you time. It's pretty decent against Death Shadow. It's okay against humans. It's okay against a lot of other matchups, especially if you can pair it with a Shuffle effect. Celestial Purge, good against Burn, good against things like Mardu Pyromancer, any type of Blood Moon decks, etc. You want to have outs to those cards. You want to have outs to things like Liliana. A couple Surgical Extractions, primarily for graveyard decks, but you can also bring this in against Tron to pair with your Field of Ruins, also against Valakut. A couple of Negates, pretty generic card, covers a lot of the non-creature permanents. The main deck's pretty slanted towards creatures between Path to Exile and Terminus. So having some answers to non-creature things like Planeswalkers, discard spells, etc. Couple Dispels for pretty much for the burn and the control mirror. You might also bring him in against KCI and such to help protect against things like Guttural Response to your counterspell, stopping some of their stuff. Detention Sphere, pretty good catch-all. I'm considering removing like one of the Thought Scours next week to put a Detention Sphere in the main deck. One of Supreme Verdict. Fist Sweeper helps against decks like humans and such that sometimes have, naming Meddling Mage on Terminus. You need to be able to clear their board. Also a Fist Sweeper in a lot of creature decks like against Eldrazi, Tron, Affinity, etc. Vendilion Click, you bring this in a matchup where you need to pressure and disrupt your opponent. So decks that you feel like are really far behind, things like Burn, some of the combo matchups, the Control Mirror, etc. You'll want to bring in Vendilion Click as an additional threat in addition to your Snapcaster Mages and Celestial Colonnades. So the meta I played against last night was I hadn't played in a couple weeks, so I wasn't sure what I was walking into. So I was just kind of walking in with a very generic sideboard, not trying to hate on any particular deck or anything. I ended up playing Burn round 1, which, having played Burn a lot, I know is an atrocious matchup for blue-white, or it's pretty bad. You can try to play Timely Reinforcements to try to have game against Burn, but honestly, blue-white takes so long to win that I found even Timely Reinforcements isn't enough. So I actually made a very conscious decision not to include any Burn hate cards, specific Burn hate cards. And Timely can be okay against other aggressive decks, but I think between the Terminus, the Oust, and the Supreme Verdict, and the Detention Spheres, if there's any matchups where my counterspells aren't bad and I really need sweepers, I have quite a bit of things already at my disposal, so I didn't really feel the need to add Timely Reinforcements to the deck. So got pretty quickly 2-0'd. I did have a chance in Game 2. I cast Approach of the Second Sun. My opponent had one card in hand. If it wasn't Skullcrack, then we were going to buy ourselves a couple of turns, and between the Planeswalker, I think I had a Planeswalker in play at the time, would have allowed me to potentially get back to the Approach of the Second Sun and win the game, but that matchup just felt really, really bad. Matchup number 2 was against Affinity. It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. Game 1, they had a pretty fast start on the play. Cast an Opt on their turn, didn't find Terminus, didn't find Terminus on my turn. During their third turn, I cast Thought Scour and managed to miracle Terminus. Cleared up their board. By that point, though, I was at like a couple of points. And we played some back and forth. I got Gal blasted. And then my opponent had a Blink Moth Nexus in play. I had a bunch of, like 4 or 5 mana open, including a Field of Ruin. I had a Terminus on top of my deck, a Thought Scour in hand. And the line I took actually ended up costing me game 1 was I Field of Ruined his Ink Moth, and because I only left up a white and a blue, I wasn't able to cast the Logic Knot in my hand and got Gal blasted with the Field of Ruin trigger on the stack. So I had a couple different ways I could have proceeded to try to win, or to try to stabilize there. I had an active Jason play, an active Teferi in play. I had an approach the second Sun in hand, but I didn't want to tap out for that and get Gal blasted. So I was pretty close to stabilizing game 1, but kind of fumbled. Game 2 and game 3 were pretty much just find Terminus, sweep their board, win the game. Affinity is a pretty decent matchup unless they have their absolutely insane starts or you make a mistake like I did. Match 3 was against Eldrazi Tron. It was a 2-0. They had some pretty decent starts. They had Cavern of Souls to get around my counter spells. So I pretty much went up on my creature hate, brought in the Oust, brought in the Detention Spears, brought in the Supreme Verdict. Match number 4 was against tokens. Main deck configuration isn't great against tokens. You do have your sweepers, but Path to Exile is terrible in that matchup. Counter spells are fine. It was kind of a budget black-white list, only in terms of the mana base. So game 2 and game 3, his mana base punished him a little bit. I was able to bring in the Detention Spheres, the Supreme Verdict, boarded out the Path to Exiles, also brought in the Negates. So overall, 3-1 with our first week with Blue-White Miracles in Modern FNM. Not too bad. I don't know that I really want to change too much for next week. Approach of the Second Sun, definitely training wheels, but I want to be able to win the game and not get a time every round. I'm not sure what win con I want besides the Planeswalkers, obviously, but Approach is kind of a nice fill-in for now. Beyond that, sideboard, the only thing I'm thinking of is like cut a Thought Scour, bring an Attention Sphere in the main deck, and then figure out what I want the 15th card to be, whether I want it to be a Wrath of God, or do I want like another disruption element against like maybe a third Stony Silence or the first Rest in Peace. Meta there is kind of fluid, so it's kind of hard to say what I really want. Like last night there was a Pox deck, there was a Pyromancer deck, there was a Tron deck, there was Eldrazi Tron, there was Affinity, there was Humans, there was I don't even know what all else. So that's pretty much the deck tech, what I've been playing, some of the matchups, a little bit what's going on. If you have any suggestions or any experience with the Blue-White Miracles archetype, any help would be appreciated. It's my first time stepping out playing Miracles in Modern. Obviously, I have some recent experience with Esper Control in Standard, Esper and Blue-White. I played Blue-White Approach and then into Esper Control. So, trying to broaden my horizons as a Magic player. This is the second deck that I've invested in paper for right now. Deck seems pretty legit. 3-1 the first time out wasn't too bad. I think I did 2-2 my first several times with Burn, so I guess I should be thankful that I had such a good result the first time out. Beyond that, that's pretty much the wrap up for FNM last night. Thanks everyone for tuning in. This has been Dust for Dust on Gaming.